concert hall was already awake long before the audience arrived. Soft lights glowed above the empty seats, and the stage stood quiet, waiting. The smell of polished wood mixed with the faint scent of cleaning spray. Every sound echoed gently, footsteps traveling farther than expected in the wide space. At the center of the stage sat a grand piano, its black surface shining under the lights. A concert pianist stood nearby, stretching her fingers and rolling her shoulders as if preparing for a battle only she understood. She had played in many halls like this, maybe even grander ones, but she treated every performance as if it mattered more than the last. People around her moved carefully, almost nervously, afraid to interrupt her focus. She sat down and began to play. The notes flowed fast and sharp at first, filling the hall with energy. Then they softened, becoming slow and deep, as if the piano itself was breathing. Each sound landed perfectly, practiced and controlled. A few staff members paused their work to listen. They had heard her play before, but it never sounded ordinary. There was power in it and confidence too. Near the back of the hall, a janitor pushed a cleaning cart across the floor. The wheels squeaked quietly, though he tried his best to keep them silent. He wore a simple uniform, slightly faded, with gloves tucked into one pocket. His movements were slow and careful, not from laziness, but from habit. He had learned long ago how to move without being noticed. As he cleaned, he listened. When the pianist's fingers moved across the keys, his hands stopped. The cloth in his grip stayed frozen in midair. His head tilted slightly, eyes fixed on the stage. To anyone watching, it might have looked like a short break from work. But inside, something deeper was happening. He knew this music. Not just the tune, but the feeling behind it. He could tell where the pianist hesitated, where she pushed too hard, where she held back. His fingers twitched lightly, pressing against his palm as if touching invisible keys. A memory stirred, quiet but strong. The pianist finished the piece and lifted her hands. The sound faded into silence. One of the organizers clapped lightly and smiled, praising her. She nodded, stood up, and walked a few steps away from the piano, shaking her hands to loosen them. The janitor returned to cleaning, but his mind stayed on the stage. He worked his way closer, wiping the edges of seats near the front rows. Each step forward felt heavier than the last. He was not nervous in the usual way. It was more like standing at the edge of a long-forgotten door, unsure if opening it was wise. The pianist sat again and began another piece. This one was softer, slower. The hall felt different now, calmer. The janitor's eyes closed for a moment. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. When the music stopped again, there was a short break. The pianist stood, took a sip of water, and spoke quietly with someone beside the stage. Her voice carried confidence, even when she whispered. She belonged here. Everyone could feel it. The janitor looked down at his hands. They were rough, marked by years of work. Small scars crossed his fingers, reminders of a life lived carefully but not gently. Still, he trusted them. They had not forgotten what to do. Before he could change his mind, he stepped forward. The sound of his shoes echoed louder than he expected. A few heads turned. Someone frowned slightly, unsure why he was approaching the stage area. He stopped a short distance away, clearing his throat. "Excuse me," he said, his voice low but steady. The pianist turned, surprised. Her eyes moved from his face to his uniform and back again. For a moment, she said nothing. "Yes?" she replied, polite but distant. He shifted his weight, suddenly aware of how small he looked standing there. "I don't mean to interrupt," he said. "I was just wondering. Would it be possible for me to play the piano for a minute?" The words hung in the air. A few people nearby exchanged looks. One of the staff members let out a short laugh, thinking it was a joke. Another raised an eyebrow. The pianist blinked once, then smiled, not unkindly at first. "You play?" she asked, her tone light, almost amused. "A little," he said. She let out a soft laugh, louder this time. "This is a professional instrument," she said, gesturing toward the piano. "And we're on a tight schedule." He nodded quickly. "I understand." Just 1 minute. I won't take much time. Her smile changed. It wasn't cruel, but it wasn't warm either. I'm sure you enjoy music, she said. But this isn't really the place for that. The staff member beside her chuckled again. Someone whispered something under their breath. The janitor felt the heat rise to his face, but he kept his posture straight. I wouldn't ask if it didn't matter, he said quietly. That made her pause. She studied him more closely now. His clothes were plain. His face showed age, not just in years but in experience. Still, to her, he was out of place. This stage had rules, even unspoken ones, and he didn't fit them. I'm sorry, she said, firmer now. We need to focus. There was no anger in her voice, but there was certainty. The conversation was over. The janitor nodded. Of course, he said. Thank you for listening. He turned and walked away. His steps were calm, even, as if nothing had happened. But inside, something sank quietly, like a stone dropped into deep water. Behind him, the pianist watched for a second longer than she meant to. She shook her head slightly, as if clearing a strange thought, then returned to the piano. As the janitor pushed his cart back toward the side aisle, the whispers continued. Some people laughed it off. Others looked uncomfortable, unsure why the moment felt heavier than it should have. The janitor reached the corner and stopped. He leaned on the handle of his cart and stared at the floor. The shine of the polished surface reflected the stage lights, broken by small streaks he hadn't cleaned yet. He remembered another floor, long ago, just as shiny. He remembered sitting straight, hands poised, waiting for a signal. He remembered applause that once felt endless. He shook his head gently, as if brushing away dust from an old shelf in his mind. Work was work. Music was music. Life had made sure those things stayed separate for him. Still, as the pianist began to play again, something shifted. The notes filled the hall, but they no longer sounded the same. Not to him and not, perhaps, to her either. She played perfectly, but her thoughts wandered for a brief moment. Why would a janitor ask to play here? The question stayed, quiet but stubborn, floating between the notes as the hall slowly prepared for the night that would change everything. The hall felt different after that moment. The lights were still bright, the piano still on stage, but something unseen had shifted. People moved around as usual, yet small glances were exchanged, quiet looks that said more than words. The request had been simple, but it had left a mark. The pianist continued rehearsing, her posture straight, her fingers precise. She played piece after piece, each one clean and confident. Anyone listening would say it was flawless. Still, between the notes, her mind wandered. It annoyed her. She was not used to distraction, especially not from something so small. She told herself it meant nothing. Across the hall, the janitor worked through the rows near the side wall. He wiped armrests, picked up small pieces of paper, straightened programs that had been left behind. His face showed no sign of what had happened earlier. If anyone watched closely, they might notice he moved a little slower, more careful than before. A staff member passed by and glanced at him. "You all right?" the staff member asked, not unkindly. "Yes," the janitor replied. "All good." The staff member nodded and walked on. The moment passed just like that. During a short break, a group of workers gathered near the back, sipping coffee and chatting quietly. Someone brought up the earlier moment, shaking their head with a grin. "Did you see that?" one whispered. "Asking to play the piano like that." Another laughed softly. "Bold, I'll give him that. But strange," someone else added. "Who does that?" Their voices weren't loud, but the janitor heard enough. He didn't turn around. He focused on the floor in front of him, following the pattern of the tiles. He had learned long ago how to let words pass through without cutting too deep. Still, not everyone laughed. One woman among them stayed quiet. She had noticed the way he spoke earlier. Calm, respectful, not joking. She remembered his eyes when he asked, steady and serious. It didn't look like a dare or a dream. It looked like something he believed in. On stage, the pianist stretched her hands again. Her manager stepped closer and spoke softly about the evening schedule. The audience, the importance of staying focused. She listened and nodded, but her eyes drifted toward the side of the hall, toward the cleaning cart parked near the wall. She frowned slightly, annoyed at herself. Why would that bother her? She had worked too hard to be distracted by a stranger in a uniform. She had spent years training, sacrificing comfort, sleep, and normal life. This stage was earned, not shared. She reminded herself of that. The janitor finished his section and moved toward a storage room to refill his supplies. The small room smelled of soap and dust. He leaned against the counter and let out a slow breath. His hands trembled just a little. He clenched them, then relaxed them again. He hadn't expected the answer to be yes. Still, hearing no out loud carried a weight he hadn't prepared for. Not because of pride, but because asking had taken more courage than anyone there could know. He remembered the first time he had touched a piano. It had been taller than him back then. He remembered the sound, how it filled a room and made him feel seen. Those memories stayed quiet now, folded neatly inside him like old letters. He picked up the mop again and returned to the hall. As the afternoon went on, more people arrived. Technicians checked lights and sound. Chairs were adjusted. The hall slowly transformed from a working space into a place of expectation. The janitor stayed out of the way, moving along the edges, invisible again. The pianist finished her final rehearsal and stood up. Applause came from a few staff members. She smiled, thanked them, and stepped away from the piano. As she walked toward her dressing area, she passed near where the janitor was wiping the floor. Their eyes met for a brief second. He gave a small nod, respectful and quiet. No bitterness, no regret. She hesitated, then nodded back without thinking. She walked on, feeling an odd tightness in her chest. In her dressing room, she sat in front of the mirror and stared at her reflection. She looked confident, composed, exactly how the world expected her to look. Still, her thoughts drifted again. What if he really could play? The idea felt foolish. Talent didn't hide behind mops and carts. Talent was recognized, trained, placed on stages like this. That was how it worked. She shook her head, annoyed at the doubt creeping in. The evening grew closer. The audience began to arrive, filling the hall with soft chatter and movement. The janitor stepped farther into the background now, focusing only on small tasks. He watched the crowd from a distance, seeing excitement in their faces. He wondered what it would feel like to sit among them, waiting, heart racing, knowing music was about to begin. He had felt that before long ago. A young usher walked by and smiled at him. "Big night," the usher said. "Yes," the janitor replied. "Very big." As the minutes passed, tension grew. The pianist prepared backstage, warming her fingers quietly. Her breathing slowed, her focus sharpened. This was her moment. The hall buzzed with expectation. Then something small went wrong. It wasn't dramatic, nothing loud. Just a sudden stiffness in her hand as she stretched her fingers one last time. A sharp discomfort ran through her wrist. She froze, testing it again. The feeling didn't disappear. Her manager noticed the change in her face. "What's wrong?" he asked. "Nothing," she said quickly. "Just need a moment." She flexed her hand again. The pain was still there, light but worrying. Fear crept in, the kind she hated most. Not fear of failure, but fear of not being in control. Back in the hall, the janitor sensed the shift before he understood it. Movement slowed. Voices hushed in strange patterns. He saw staff members walking faster, whispering. A rumor passed quietly from one person to another. Something about a delay. The janitor leaned on his cart, watching the stage. His heart beat a little faster, though he didn't know why. On stage, the piano waited, silent and patient. And somewhere between the polished floor and the glowing lights, the line between who belonged there and who did not began to blur, just slightly, as the night moved closer to a moment no one could yet see coming. The delay was not announced right away. At first, it showed in small signs only. Ushers slowed their steps. Staff members leaned closer to each other when they spoke. The quiet hum of the audience turned uncertain, like a room holding its breath. Backstage, The pianist sat with her hand resting on her lap. She pressed her fingers together gently, testing them again. The stiffness had not gone away. It wasn't sharp pain, but it was enough to shake her confidence. She had trained her whole life to trust her hands. Now even a small doubt felt dangerous. Her manager knelt beside her. "We can give you a few more minutes," he said softly. "The audience doesn't know yet." She nodded, eyes fixed on the floor. "I'll be fine," she said, though the words didn't feel solid. She stood and walked slowly, rolling her shoulders, breathing the way she had been taught. Control the body, calm the mind. Still, the tension stayed. Out in the hall, the janitor noticed the clock on the wall. The start time had passed. People shifted in their seats. Some checked their phones. A few whispered. He pushed his cart toward the far wall and stopped. He didn't want to be in the way now. This was the moment everything tightened. He could feel it. A staff member he had seen earlier walked by again, face serious. The janitor looked up. "Is everything okay?" he asked quietly. The staff member hesitated. "Just a small issue," he said. "Nothing for you to worry about." The janitor nodded. "All right." He looked toward the stage. The piano sat alone under the lights, waiting. It always waited. That thought made him smile faintly. Backstage, the pianist tried one more stretch. This time, she winced before she could stop herself. Her manager saw it. His expression changed. "You don't have to push through," he said carefully. She looked at him, eyes sharp. "I can't cancel," she said. "Not tonight." "I know," he replied. "But we need to think clearly." Silence stretched between them. Then someone else spoke, almost as a joke. "Well," a staff member said lightly, "we could let the janitor play." A few people chuckled, nervous laughter. The idea hung there, awkward and half-formed. The pianist froze. The memory of that calm voice asking for 1 minute came back to her. The steady eyes. The way he had walked away without anger. "That's not funny," she said. "I know," the staff member replied quickly. "I was just trying to ease the mood." But the thought didn't leave. Her manager frowned. "Wait," he said slowly. "You mean the man from earlier?" "Yes," the staff member said. "The one who asked to play." The pianist looked down at her hand again. The hall was full. The audience was waiting. Time was moving whether she wanted it to or not. "This is ridiculous," she said, though her voice lacked strength. Her manager studied her face. He had seen fear before. Not stage fright, but something deeper. The fear of failing expectations. "What if," he said carefully, "we let him play just a few notes, while we sort this out?" She looked up, shocked. "You can't be serious." "I'm serious about buying time," he replied. "That's all." She stood there, heart racing, letting a stranger touch her piano. In front of everyone. The idea felt wrong. And yet, the night was already slipping. 5 minutes, she said finally. "That's it." No one smiled. The room stayed tense. Out in the hall, an announcement was made about a short delay. Polite applause followed, mixed with confusion. The janitor listened, his grip tightening on the cart handle. Then he felt a presence beside him. He turned. It was the manager. "Can I talk to you?" the manager asked. The janitor straightened. "Yes, of course." The manager lowered his voice. "Earlier today you asked to play the piano." "Yes," the janitor replied, not hiding it. "Was that serious?" the manager asked. The janitor didn't answer right away. He looked toward the stage, then back at the manager. "Yes," he said. "Very serious." The manager nodded slowly. "Would you be willing to play something now? Just a short piece." The janitor's heart skipped. He felt the room tilt slightly, like the ground moving under his feet. "Now?" he asked. "Yes," the manager said. "On stage." For a moment the janitor said nothing. Years of silence pressed against his chest. Then he breathed in and out, steadying himself. "If that's truly what you want," he said, "I can." The manager gestured toward the stage. "Follow me." As they walked, people noticed. Heads turned. Whispers grew louder. Some recognized him as the man from earlier. Confusion spread across faces. What's happening? Who is that? Is this part of the show? The janitor walked carefully, step by step. Each footstep echoed. His hands felt warm now, alive. He rubbed them together gently as they reached the stairs. Backstage, the pianist watched from the shadows. Her chest tightened as she saw him approach. He looked calm. Too calm. "This is a mistake," she whispered. "Maybe," her manager said. "Or maybe it's just unusual." The janitor stepped onto the stage. The lights felt brighter than he expected. The audience blurred into a single shape, a sea of faces and expectation. The piano stood in front of him, unchanged, familiar. He stopped beside it and took a breath. The pianist remained backstage, arms crossed, watching. Part of her wanted him to fail quickly. To prove this had been foolish. Another part, smaller and quieter, hoped for something else. The janitor sat down. The bench felt solid beneath him. He placed his hands on his knees first, grounding himself. Then he lifted them slowly and rested his fingers on the keys. The hall was completely silent now. No one laughed. No one whispered. The janitor closed his eyes. For a brief moment, he was no longer a janitor. He was simply a person about to speak in the only language that had ever fully understood him. He pressed the first key. The sound was soft, almost shy. A single note, clear and steady. Then another, and another. The pianist's breath caught. This was not random. This was not guessing. The janitor's fingers moved with care, not rushing, not showing off. The melody grew slowly, filling the space in a way that felt natural, honest. The piano responded to him as if it had been waiting. In the audience, people leaned forward without realizing it. A few blinked, surprised. This was not what they expected. Backstage, the pianist felt something shift inside her. The stiffness in her hand faded from her thoughts. All she could hear was the music. The janitor continued, each note building on the last. The hall listened, not because they were told to, but because they couldn't look away. And in that moment, before anyone fully understood what was happening, the night crossed a line it could never return from. The first notes had filled the hall, soft but deliberate, and then the sound began to grow. It was not the hurried, polished playing of someone who performed on stages every night. It was steady, honest, and full of feeling. The janitor's fingers moved across the keys like they had a mind of their own, recalling memories he had never shared with anyone. Every note carried weight, as if each one had been held inside him for years, waiting for this single chance. The audience had gone quiet. People who had been chatting or shifting in their seats were now frozen, their eyes fixed on the stage. The piano's sound filled every corner of the hall, touching the walls, the ceiling, even the floor. There was a warmth to it that no one could describe, only feel. Some leaned closer, unconsciously drawn toward the music, as if it had a gravity of its own. Backstage, the pianist had stepped forward from the shadows. She could no longer hide behind her professionalism. Her hand, the one that had been stiff and tense, now twitched slightly, aching to move along with the music. She had played every piece perfectly countless times, yet nothing she had done before had ever made her stop like this. Her heart pounded, her chest felt tight, and her mind raced. How could someone she had dismissed moments ago hold a hall so completely? She swallowed, trying to maintain composure, but her breathing betrayed her calm. On stage, the janitor did not look at the audience. He did not look at the pianist or anyone backstage. His eyes were focused on the keys and the music inside him. His body was still, except for his fingers, which moved with a precision that was almost effortless. He had not played in years, not on a stage, not in public, but it was as if the piano remembered him as well as he remembered it. Each note seemed to tell a story of work, sacrifice, longing, and quiet passion. It was a story he had never voiced, and yet everyone could feel it. The sound swelled, louder now, commanding attention without shouting. People in the audience held their breath, unsure how to react. The hall was not just quiet. It was respectful in a way that comes naturally when something unexpected and true captures attention. Some closed their eyes to absorb it fully. Some had tears in their eyes without knowing why. The janitor's music seemed to reach inside them, bypassing thought and speaking directly to emotion. The pianist's hands itched to move, but she remained frozen. She had always believed that technique and discipline separated the ordinary from the extraordinary. Yet here, technique alone did not matter. She watched, realizing that this man she had mocked had something far deeper than any skill she had ever measured. There was honesty in the playing, a depth she had never encountered in rehearsals, in concert halls, or even in master classes. Every note seemed deliberate yet effortless, simple yet profoundly complex. The janitor's back was straight, his shoulders relaxed. There was no tension, no fear, only the flow of sound that seemed to come from years of listening, of feeling, and of waiting. Occasionally he would pause slightly, just a fraction of a second, letting the silence speak. The hall held onto those moments, letting them settle before the next wave of music washed over them. It was almost sacred, a brief communion between the performer and the space. Backstage, whispers had started, but they were quiet, almost reverent. "Did you hear that?" someone said. "It's incredible." Another shook their head. "I don't understand. Who is he?" But no one dared to speak above the music. The piano demanded silence, and everyone obeyed. The janitor continued, building momentum. The melody twisted and turned, slow and mournful one moment, soaring the next. He did not look for applause, did not seek recognition. He played as though the piano itself had asked for the story to be told, and he was simply the messenger. There was a purity to it that touched everyone watching. Even those who did not understand music could feel it. Some felt memories of their own stirred by the rhythm, memories long buried, memories they hadn't known were there. The pianist felt a knot loosen inside her. She had felt confident only moments ago, in control. Now, she realized control did not mean understanding. She had spent years chasing perfection, trying to master every nuance of her craft. But mastery without heart was empty. Here, before her eyes, was mastery paired with something far greater. Lived experience, humanity, and emotion. The realization hit her like a blow. She had been wrong to dismiss him. Her pride had blinded her. She moved closer, unable to stop herself. Her hand hovered near the edge of the stage, almost touching the space where he sat. She wanted to intervene, to play alongside him, but she knew she could not. To interrupt would break the spell, and she did not want that. She stood still, listening, learning, and feeling. Every note, every pause, every subtle inflection taught her something she had never known. That talent could hide, unnoticed, waiting for a chance, and that judgment could never replace understanding. The janitor's hands never faltered. They glided across the keys, coaxing the music to life with a gentle authority. He played with patience, never rushing, yet the flow was hypnotic. The room itself seemed to respond. The lights reflected on the polished piano surface, catching small movements of his fingers, but nothing distracted from the sound. Even the air felt different, charged with quiet energy, with awe that could not be forced. In the audience, someone gasped quietly, unable to contain it. Others leaned forward in disbelief. The hall had been filled many times before, with famous musicians, with applause and grandeur, but nothing had ever drawn such focused attention. The feeling was different. It was honest, raw, and unexpected. People realized that this was not a performance designed for praise. It was a gift. The pianist took a small step back, then another. She realized she had been holding her breath. She let it out slowly. Tears formed in her eyes, not from sadness, but from recognition, from understanding, from witnessing something she had never seen before. She had always admired skill, but this was more than skill. This was life in music, lived fully and shared without pretense. The janitor played on, and as he did, his story unfolded. He had not spoken of his training, of the hours spent at a piano when no one watched. He had not spoken of dreams deferred, of opportunities lost, of moments when music had been the only companion. But now every note told a piece of it. He spoke without words, and the hall understood. The piece reached a quiet climax. A long note hung in the air, trembling just slightly, as if it were aware of the heart's listening. Then he let it fade. Silence followed, deep and complete. It was not empty. It was full of everything that had come before. Effort, patience, memory, hope. The hall held its breath, letting it settle before reacting. No one moved immediately. The audience waited, unsure what to do. Then slowly, almost hesitantly, applause began. One hand clapped, then another. It spread like wildfire. People stood, unable to contain their awe. Some wept quietly. Some clutched the arms of their chairs. The applause was thunderous, heartfelt, and unrestrained. It filled the hall, but it did not diminish the music. It celebrated it. The janitor rose from the bench slowly, bowing slightly, not to claim glory, but to acknowledge the shared moment. His hands were still trembling, but not from fear. It was from release, from letting something long held finally speak. Backstage, the pianist watched, speechless. Her hand itched to touch the keys, to play alongside him, but she understood it was not her place now. She felt a deep humility. Everything she thought she knew about talent, about recognition, about judgment had been challenged. She realized how small assumptions could make even the most accomplished blind to truth. He stepped away from the piano. The bench seemed to sigh, as if it had fulfilled its purpose. The hall was alive with energy, buzzing quietly under the roar of applause. But the janitor's face remained calm. He did not seek attention. He did not bask in praise. He had played because he had to, and the music had answered him. People in the audience began to whisper among themselves. Who is he? How is this possible? I've never heard anything like that. Some asked questions no one could answer. Some simply nodded, understanding that explanation was unnecessary. The music had spoken. The pianist moved closer to the stage. She stepped into the light and approached him slowly. Her face was pale, and her eyes were wide with admiration. She extended her hand, not in judgment, not in pride, but in recognition. He looked at her briefly and nodded, acknowledging her presence but not needing approval. The hall seemed to understand the exchange, quieting once again in the wake of the shared understanding. The audience continued to clap, some standing, some silent, but all feeling that they had witnessed something rare, something genuine. The janitor took one final breath, then stepped back, letting the moment settle around him. He had not sought it, yet it had found him. And in doing so, he had changed the night, the hall, and everyone present. The pianist remained at the edge of the stage, humbled. She understood now that talent could not always be measured by appearances, that sometimes the quietest, most unassuming people carried the greatest gifts. She realized she had been wrong to mock, wrong to dismiss, and wrong to assume that only those in the spotlight were worthy of attention. The janitor walked toward the side, pushing his cart gently, his heart steady. He had shared what he needed to, and the world had listened. And in that hall, filled with music, light, and awe, something had shifted. Not just in the audience, but in the pianist too. She would never hear a piano the same way again. The night had crossed a threshold. What had begun as a simple, impossible request had become a moment of truth. And for the janitor, it had been exactly what he needed. A single chance to speak through the only voice that had always truly belonged to him. The hall was still buzzing from the applause, though the janitor had stepped back from the piano. He felt a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. Not physical exhaustion, he could have kept playing, but a weight that had been sitting on his shoulders for years had finally lifted. Every note he had played carried a lifetime of quiet longing, and now it had been heard, understood without a single question. People in the audience were on their feet, clapping, cheering, some wiping tears from their eyes. They had expected a performance from a famous pianist, a show of skill and polish. Instead, they had witnessed something entirely different. They had witnessed honesty, and the effect of it was powerful. The pianist approached him slowly, her steps careful, almost hesitant. Her usual confidence was replaced by something softer, something heavier with thought. She stopped a few feet away, her eyes meeting his. There was awe there, yes, but also regret. She had judged him too quickly, laughed at a request that was serious, and now she saw how wrong she had been. She started but paused. Words failed her. How could she explain what she had just realized in a few short sentences? How could she say that she had been blinded by her own assumptions? The janitor watched her quietly. There was no resentment in his face, no pride that demanded recognition. He had played because he had to, because the music needed to be heard. That was enough. The pianist finally found her voice. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I judged you too quickly. I shouldn't have." Her hands twitched slightly as if she wanted to reach out and touch his hands, to feel the way they had spoken through the piano. He nodded once, quietly, accepting the apology without needing more. Someone in the audience whispered, "Who is he?" A few heads turned, curious to learn more about the man who had stunned them so completely. But the janitor did not speak much about himself. That had never been his way. His story had been told through the music itself, and for him that was enough. Backstage, the staff and the pianist's manager were still processing the evening. They had been part of countless performances, seen virtuosos play, witnessed extraordinary talent before, but nothing had moved them like this. They had assumed they knew how the night would unfold, and yet everything had shifted in an instant. The pianist stepped closer again, and the janitor stepped back slightly, almost instinctively. She raised a hand, not to command, but to gesture gently. Would you like to tell them about yourself?" she asked. The janitor shook his head. A small smile touched his lips. He didn't need to. The audience had already felt the depth of his life through the piano. Words were unnecessary. He walked slowly toward the edge of the stage, moving with a quiet dignity. The lights caught the polished surface of the piano and glinted on his simple uniform. He looked like someone ordinary, and yet no one could doubt the extraordinary talent that had just passed through his fingers. The contrast was striking. Life had hidden him away in plain sight, yet when he had been called, he had stepped forward without hesitation. People began to approach him now, some slowly, some with cautious excitement. They wanted to shake his hand, to thank him, to hear more about the person behind the music. But he stayed calm, polite, and unassuming. One by one, he acknowledged their admiration with nods, small smiles, never overstepping, never seeking attention. The pianist stood slightly behind him, watching. She had always believed that music was something measured by perfection, by precision, by skill that could be recorded and repeated. But this night had taught her otherwise. Talent could hide in the quietest places, waiting patiently for the right moment to be recognized. And sometimes, that talent was paired with humility, patience, and a life of experiences that gave every note meaning beyond technical mastery. The hall had begun to empty slowly, but the energy lingered. People talked in hushed voices, replaying what they had heard, trying to put into words the experience they had just felt. Some shook their heads, still in disbelief. Others smiled quietly, carrying with them a small piece of the music in their hearts. The janitor returned to his cart, pushing it gently along the side of the hall. He paused occasionally, glancing back at the piano. It had been a companion in his youth, a confidant through hard times, and now it had spoken through him to the world. The experience had not changed the piano or him entirely, but it had changed the way he felt in that hall. Something inside him had been restored. Backstage, the pianist finally took a deep breath. She had seen humility in action, talent without recognition, and passion without expectation. She had realized that she had been quick to judge, quick to dismiss, quick to laugh at what she did not understand. And now she knew how wrong that had been. She wanted to apologize again, to truly express her respect, but she also knew that some things were better shown in action rather than words. She picked up her coat slowly and walked toward the exit. She moved with quiet reverence, her mind replaying the music she had just heard. It was not just sound, it was life distilled into notes. She realized she would never hear a piano in the same way again. Every performance she would play from now on would carry the memory of this night, the reminder that true artistry could hide in the most unexpected places. The janitor stepped outside the hall into the cool night air. The streets were quiet, the lights soft. He pushed his cart slowly, allowing himself to feel the weight lifting from his shoulders. He had done what he had always needed to do. He had played. He had been heard. And that was enough. Somewhere behind him, the lights of the hall glowed warmly, as if still celebrating the music that had filled it. People would speak of this night for years, remembering not the famous names on the marquee, but the quiet man who had stood before the piano and revealed something extraordinary through the simplicity of honesty and experience. He walked steadily down the street, each step lighter than before. The world outside had not changed, but he had. The music he carried inside him was no longer a secret. He had shared it with a room full of people, and in return, he had received something he had long forgotten: recognition, not for pride, but for the truth of his talent, and respect earned without seeking it. The pianist watched from a distance, standing at the edge of the hall entrance. She remained silent, absorbing the scene. She had witnessed a lesson that could not be taught, only felt. Talent was not always where the world expected it to be. Greatness was not always obvious. Sometimes, it lived quietly, patiently, and waited for the chance to speak. As the night settled, the janitor continued walking, his mind calm, his heart steady. He had not played for fame or attention. He had played because he had to. And now the hall, the audience, the pianist, and everyone present had witnessed something rare, something true. The memory of the music lingered in the air like a gentle echo, following him as he walked into the quiet streets. The notes had spoken louder than applause ever could. They had told a story of patience, of waiting, of quiet strength. They had told a story that no one could forget, and for him that was enough. The pianist remained in the shadows, watching him leave. She had learned something she could not unlearn. She had seen humility in action, mastery without need of recognition, and passion without demand. She had realized that the world often overlooked greatness because it appeared in unexpected forms. And now she would carry that lesson with her forever. Back inside, the hall felt empty, but it was not truly empty. The echo of the music remained, lingering in the polished wood, the velvet seats, the still air. It was a presence that would not fade easily. It would remain a reminder that some moments are too real to be forgotten, that talent sometimes waits quietly, and that respect and recognition are best earned by truth, not assumption. The janitor turned the corner and disappeared into the quiet streets, leaving behind the hall, the lights, and the people who had been changed by his music. He had returned to his life, simple and steady, yet altered in a way that no one could measure. The music had spoken, the world had listened, and he had been heard. The night air was still and calm as he walked, but inside him, there was a warmth, a sense of completion that only comes when one has done what one was always meant to do. It was not about fame or applause or recognition. It was about the truth of the music, and the truth had been spoken. For the pianist, for the audience, and for the janitor himself, the night had become unforgettable. Each person would carry it differently. Some as a story to tell, some as a lesson learned, some simply as a memory of something extraordinary. But everyone who had been present had witnessed a rare truth, that talent can hide in unexpected places, that humility and patience matter, and that a single moment of courage can change everything. And so the janitor walked on, quietly, humbly, and fully, knowing that he had done what he had always needed to do. The hall would remember him. The pianist would remember him. And for the first time in many years, he remembered himself. The music had spoken. He had answered. And the world, for once, had listened.